Hi, welcome to our new episode of Cultivate, and I'm here today with Reverend Shavon Walker. And we're on location at Burien Community Church, and I wanted to film here because this is actually where you just recently got ordained. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You're a wonderful member here, and the ministry that you've done here is deeply appreciated. But not only that, you are on staff at the Evergreen region as the Minister of Social Media. Now, I thought it'd be nice for our audience, or people who don't know you, tell us a bit about how did you get into this role?
Well, the previous Minister of Social Media, Minnie Welton Mitchell, was leaving that position. And she knew that I had an interest in social media just in general. So she asked me if I would be interested. I figured that taking this position, I still consider myself somewhat new to Evergreen. And for me, taking this position was a chance to learn more about the region, about the people that I would be serving in the churches and everything. So I jumped at the opportunity, and here I am.
Great. So I think you're also uniquely prepared for this kind of role because you have a very special connection with social media. So I thought it'd be nice for those who don't know, tell us a bit about what's your relationship with social media right now?
In general, I have a thing about social media in general. During the pandemic in particular, we became very aware of how important it was in order to maintain communication with people. Facebook and messaging, and then there were other platforms that people could go to. There's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's Blue Sky now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just on a secular level, I've always been interested in communication. Then I also have a Twitch channel. And on my Twitch channel, I do a lot of food and drink. That's the category that I do my live streams in. The energy that I kind of want to project is, you're at my house, you're my guest, you're hanging out with me in my kitchen while I cook, we're having conversations. And one of the special things that I do, which is part of my ministry on Twitch, anybody who goes to my channel can find out pretty quickly that I'm a pastor or I am ordained. And one of my redemptions is called pastoral motivation. So for a certain number of points, people can ask for something uplifting. And apparently this week was a very bad week for a lot of folks. Yesterday, I did my latest stream, and I did at least 2 or 3 pastoral motivations that day. Everything from, you're having housing issues. I know this is rough, but try to find something that will make this a little more palatable for you, to, you're having family problems, or, you're sick and you've got to go to the hospital, and things like that. And I really love that particular redemption because not only do I get to uplift the people that are watching me and listening to me, it helps me as well, because occasionally I say something and think back on it a few days later and go, I guess I needed to hear that too.
Right. That's great. This is a funny thing that I've felt, even in my own life. I feel like we've always had a bias towards technology, and that technology is bad. It's just bad. It's from the devil. Like, we have these movies that talk about Skynet's gonna destroy us all. AI is gonna rule the world. But I think what we really need to show is the good of technology, right? And I think what you just highlighted here is so wonderful in that social media, so many people pan it and dismiss it, like I did, I think, in the beginning. But I realized, through COVID, is that we shouldn't get so hung up on the superficials. It's actually about connection and relationship, right? And that's, I think, essential to the gospel. And you're living it out, right? Cooking with the Reverend, right? Pastoral, responses. I love that stuff because it's all about connecting, right? In social media.
I will also say that there are other pastors on Twitch.
Yeah.
There are other people who cook on Twitch.
Right.
There are other Christians on Twitch.
Yeah.
But I have yet to see a pastor that is cooking on Twitch.
Right.
So I'm kind of unique in my little niche.
And I think that's kind of what makes it best when we don't compartmentalize ourselves, but just this is, I think you're being very authentic. This is all of me, and all of me is available to you on social media. So I think that's really great. Okay.
I'm trying to figure out, I have some funny clips of, there's that time I got a raid, where a bunch of other streamers came in to watch, and I was taking out my chicken pot pie to show them, but I forgot that I put the pie on a rack to cool, so I swung around to the camera and my pie went flying in the other direction, and like, so I made this chicken pot ramen. We're making ramen.
Awesome.
So there's things like that. And then there are, I think I have one or two actual pastoral motivations that I can send you guys.
I think that's super cool. We love to see some of those. I think those are great examples of how we, I feel like COVID especially, like, with all those Zoom cameras, like just when we were showing up in the camera, we were less like, so like produced and just like glamorous. Like TikToks aren't on like tripods anymore. Like they're just handheld, they're shaky. Like we're used to it. It almost feels more authentic, whatever that means, and it feels more real. And like, filming the mistakes or like, or the flubs and like, going with the flow. I feel like that's kind of one of the things that social media has become. It's like, we don't want finally produced material, just like we want real people that we're connecting.
And I really think that we forget about that connection, or we think that connection is superficial. I'm trying to remember, another streamer I was watching was saying that a lot of folks feel that those connections aren't genuine. Like it's a parasocial relationship. It's not a real relationship, whatever that means.
Right.
But I know that the people who watch me and some of the people that I watch feel a close connection with me because I talk to them and I say things that are going to help. And I empathize and that sort of thing. This person may live in another country, but they still know that I do care because I'm listening to them and I'm trying to hear them out. So to me, that is every bit as real as a face-to-face conversation. So.
And an important thing I want people in the Evergreen Association and beyond to know is that you're very unique because you're like a dedicated staff member who is helping empower churches to engage with social media, right? And so I wanted to give you a space in this podcast episode to kind of like also talk to the churches around us. Like what we're talking about right now about this connection is really important. So what are the things that you feel are really important for churches to consider if they want to get into social media?
I would say, first things first, know your audience. A lot of churches were very resistant to the idea of, live streaming or Zoom or anything like that until the pandemic hit. And then it was almost mandatory.
Right.
Earlier, I believe it was last year or the year before, I did a very small poll of churches and asked how many of them decided to live stream. How many of them live streamed until, the initial wave was over and then went back to face-to-face? How many never bothered? And the results were pretty interesting. There were quite a few who just basically got on board and decided to do, okay, let's do social media. Let's go ahead. Let's get on Zoom. Let's think about Facebook. Let's clean up our Facebook page and do more with it. And there were a few who were like, okay, we're just going to, go along with this until we can come back to face-to-face, and we're just going to drop this whole thing. So it was interesting thinking about the mindset of each church and where they were at that time. So I think you definitely need to know your audience because that is going to determine how you handle your social media.
Yeah, that's important because I feel like a lot of the social media I've seen with churches, just as like someone from the outside, the ones that don't do well is because like they don't know who they're talking to and they don't know themselves, right? Like the way they're trying to present themselves on social media is like, that's like if I go to visit their church, it's like, this is not what I saw. You know what I'm talking about? Like that weird disconnect. Like, and I think there's some like false narrative out there is like, you've got to be like this to attract likes or attract attention. But like you were saying, what I think the big value is like, do you have connection, engagement? Are they real? Are they authentic, right? And I think it's very satisfying when you can look at a church's website, a church's social media, and then you go there and you find out, oh, this is confirming what has been presented already. Like,
right.
There's some integrity to that, right? Yeah.
There's something to be said. One of my favorites is going to a church website and seeing candid photos.
Yeah.
And, it's not just folks sitting in a pew. It's folks communicating during, a luncheon or, having fun or doing some sort of foot race during, the big 4th of July picnic or something like that. And that lets me know, okay, this church isn't necessarily stuffy. They believe in the gospel, but they also understand that part of the gospel is community. And they're doing their best to build that.
Right.
So for me, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, I've been pastoring for 25 years, and I should know not to judge churches superficially. But honestly, I remember the last time I was like, interviewing for churches and stuff. The first thing I did was check their website. And I realized, like, unchecked, right? Like, I have theological training, I've been in the church. I've been in a lot of small churches. I'm super sympathetic churches. But I realized very quickly, I judged churches immediately from what their website looks like, right? I shouldn't be judging. But then it was an interesting tell for me is like, if I, as a pastor, am judging churches by their websites, right? What would like just an everyday, person who's not clergy be like, right? I had these checks and balances at least, but I think churches have to realize, like, the presentation of your website, the presentation of your social media is really important in communicating who you are, right? What do you think are some of the challenges that you've seen a lot with churches about the know you who you are? I think that's really valuable. What other challenges do you see?
I think, I will say that, since we are both seminary graduates, we understand the concept of high Christianity and low Christianity.
Right.
I think a lot of churches focus on the high Christianity part and are very uncomfortable with the idea of being more casual. Of course, you're a church. You want to present a church image, trademark.
Right.
You don't want to appear sloppy or, whatever. Yeah. But that's that connection, because when people come, yes, they're seeking the gospel. Yes, they want to hear good preaching and good hymns and the whole 9 yards, but they also want to know that they can connect with those people, that they're just not going there, getting a sermon, getting some songs, and leaving.
Right.
There is someone to talk to. There's someone you can say hi to, someone's child you can play with, something like that. And I think with that idea of social media, the high Christianity presentation tends to overtake that casual part, which is so very important. And I'll also point out something else. I think a lot of churches are very confused on where to start. And, a lot of folks know Facebook. So, okay, let's start there. Let's talk about a Facebook page. We can go slow. We can make it very basic. We can look at other churches' websites to get some ideas, that sort of thing. Yeah. If you want to do Zoom, or you're trying to make your Zoom better, I remember talking to the congregation members of one church that was having a problem because they could not see their Zoom participants and they couldn't hear them either. I'm like, okay, that's an easy problem to fix. So knowing or being open, I'll put it that way, being open to technology and its little quirks and that sort of thing is also super, super important. Know that you can do this on Zoom. You can't do this on Instagram because it won't let you. You can do this thing over here on TikTok, but your format's probably going to have to change. Right. Yeah, so knowing those little quirks is important.
Well, before we go further, just to help some of us who are listening, when we're talking about high church and low church, by high church we mean like liturgical, more traditional forms of church life, more structure. Low church,
more formal.
Yeah. Low church would be a lot more casual, less structured, stuff like that.
Yes.
And now going back to what you said, I like what you're talking about too, because some of the things I think you're saying is like, it is overwhelming, but you can start somewhere, right?
Exactly.
Go at what you can absorb There's always new things to do, but realize like there's a lot in your choices. Each format is ideal. Like I think some age groups, like Facebook is a way to go. For some age groups, like actually Instagram is better, or then for some is TikTok or Twitch, right?
Right.
And they all have pluses and minuses, and maybe you have to adopt several because of who's in your congregation or who you're reaching out to. So I think those are all great. Now, it can sound really overwhelming when we're talking like this, like formats, like digital technology. I mean, if you see pictures of us even filming this episode, people would be like totally like overwhelmed and scared of all the technology we're using here. But I think what's exciting about the Evergreen Association is that we have someone like you who can walk people through at a rate that is comfortable for them. And then also to just have to know that there's someone who's very sympathetic with the variety of churches. Because we have all kinds of churches, right? We have very high churches in our region to very low churches, right? Very unconventional spaces that don't even quite look like a conventional church. So I think that's really exciting. So this kind of maybe I wanted to lead, we've been talking about the challenges and such. And I'd like us to look forward a bit. Like, what do you think are some of the exciting possibilities or innovations that could happen in ministry and social media that you're thinking about?
The biggest one I can think of has to do with the biggest complaint of just about every church that I know, which is we are not growing. How do we grow?
Right.
And to me, the secret to growing is communication.
Right.
So if we can learn how to use this technology in a way to draw people in, and get them to learn about the gospel, to figure out, okay, is this the church for me? Yes, it is. I think I'm going to stay. The church starts to grow. That is my biggest hope, my biggest plan for the future.
That's a great point because I remember very distinctly during COVID, once restrictions started to lighten a bit, I actually had several members come into my church and they said it was because we were watching your messages for the past several weeks. And this made me think a lot about how I think some churches approach sort of like, oh, the real church is in the building, right? And then we're just going to set up a camera in the back just to like be the security cam or something. And it's sort of like a secondary space. And by treating it like a secondary space, anyone who's watching feels sort of like a secondary removed person.
Right.
But I think the churches that do really well recognize like this is like I don't know what the right word is, like a legitimate community, and there needs some like intentionality of connection, right? And the churches that are connecting that way are actually growing, right? Like now it might not be seats in the pews, but it's actually like the footprint is much larger than it ever could have been before, right?
Yeah, for me, I've seen, like you said, the churches that are growing are making it a point to include that wider audience. So when there are prayers, they will turn to the camera and say, okay, do any of our online friends have any prayers? Or you can type them in the chat, that sort of thing. If there are any other, type of individual intentions, then they make it a point to include that audience. And making that a point means that these people will stay. They are going to contribute. They are going to feel like they are a part of the community, as they should. So, it's. I do find it interesting when churches attempt to do somewhat of a hybrid. And do, say, Sunday school online, and then do in-person church. Communion was a very interesting situation, not only during the pandemic, but for, after the initial wave. And, there were churches that did a sort of BYOC situation, churches who would plan for communion to be, on this day at this time, maybe after services, and it would be an in-person thing. So there were all sorts of iterations, which were interesting. But the goal was to make sure that these people were included one way or another. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of like, we're in this new world. Because I felt like, working with some pastors, they're kind of like, which one's the real church? And rather than kind of treating it like that, it's like we're in a world of a multimodal church, you know? And I think you're the best example is that, you know, I don't know if some of our listeners or viewers know this, but like you live in the Bay Area, but you are a member of Berean Community Church, right? You got ordained through this church, which in Berean, Washington, right? I remember in my last year of COVID, I think it was my last year of COVID, we actually had someone become a member, but they lived in Japan, you know? So we actually did the membership service through Zoom. So there are people online and it was just really powerful, like doing a membership class via Zoom. These people were legitimate, like very real, committed members of the church. And so I think that really is a challenge, right? Like we're rethinking our idea of presence and space all the time. I guess one more thing, like I was just thinking about, I was mentioning this in a workshop once, and someone had talked about, you know, that situation when one of those Roman authorities came to Jesus and says, "Oh, my daughter needs to be healed," right? And it's like, and he said, like, "I know if you just say the word Jesus, right, she'll be healed, right?" And other people probably were like, "What? She's not going to come to my house? You know, Jesus needs to come to my house, right?" But I think that's a very interesting, now in our new world of like in-person, like physical in-person and virtual, is like maybe that God can actually move in non-in-person spaces, right? And in-person spaces are just as important. But now that the technology is where it's at, we need to kind of honor that both are valid and important spaces.
Right.
And I think technology is really important for that.
And for me, and I actually wrote an article about this, I think churches often have an issue when it comes to people who can't get to church for one reason or another. You know, if you happen to be elderly and sick, if you are injured in some way, if you are physically disabled and you can't get to the building, what do? You know, we have our agents who, you know, will go visit those people, but it's not the same as being part of the community. And I think a lot of churches realized, hey, this is a way to include these people, you know, courtesy of Zoom, and now they can watch the service, they can participate in the service. They don't have to feel like, you know, secondhand citizens anymore.
That's right.
So for me, that was, you know, a big breakthrough. And I think that's one of the other reasons that churches really need to consider this.
Yeah, because I love what you're saying, because that's a justice issue, right? It's about access to worship, right? And there's almost like this duty or obligation that the church needs to seriously consider this. And, you know, with like the advent of like AI, closed captioning, right? People who are differently abled can access worship in ways that they couldn't before. And, you know, it's an exciting time. And I guess, you know, maybe in closing, like this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that I think a real challenge for churches, you know, maybe I should say the church with a capital C, is that we need a deeper theology of technology, you know, because right now the theology of technology is being written by these like post-apocalypse, you know, sci-fi movies, you know, like it's all bad, you know, don't trust the computer, and like these kids on their social media, you know, but maybe we can see like, hey, the Spirit is moving in this. We should guide the conversation, not be kind of like behind, out of date, and just kind of being victims to it, but we could actually steer it and, you know, point to like, these are life-giving, just ways to use technology.
People are afraid of the dragon.
Right.
And the best way to get over that fear is to ride the dragon.
Right. Yes. Wow. Okay. Well, I think we've got a sermon here. I'm feeling it. Okay. Ride the dragon, everyone. Okay. Wow. That's awesome.
I want to point out one more thing. I'm not sure if this course is still being taught at BST, but one of the most eye-opening courses that I took was ministry and social media.
Yes.
And it really gave me a good understanding of, you know, the bedrock for where churches should start, what to avoid, what they should be doing, who to actually call in, you know, for certain things, because there are going to be certain things that lay people simply cannot do. And, you know, how to make this the best social media campaign possible.
Yes.
So very eye-opening, very, very useful.
And that's with Dr. Margaret Ballou?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And her husband.
Yes.
Very educational.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we highly recommend it. BST, shout out.
There you go.
Berkeley School of Theology in Berkeley. Thank you so much, Shavon. So much good food for thought. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the work that you're doing. It's great that you're a coworker. The fact that, Paul, Doug, and I are in Kent, Washington, and, you're in the Bay Area, I think it's really cool that we're still working together. So, we're kind of living out this new world in Evergreen. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And in closing, just remember to ride the dragon. All right, we'll see you next time.